Interesting, because we deal in an industry of communications and marketing and advertising with trends, and it's very trendy to talk about trends. And I'd like to start off by challenging that, by saying that actually we are in the business of behaviour change. And the behaviour you have to change is to get people to donate their time or their money. And they have to do that in the first place. Then they have to choose how much they donate, how frequently they donate, and to which cause, because there are competitors in the room. And the analogy with the commercial world is pretty perfect. That's from where I come from. And it's trendy to talk about change, but actually at the heart of behaviour change lies something unchanging. And I'd like to start with this quotation. This was written by an advertising man, Bill Bernbach, in the 60s, and it's as true today as it was then. It took millions of years for man's instincts to develop. It will take millions more for them to even vary. It's fashionable to talk about changing man. A communicator must be concerned with unchanging man, with his obsessive drive to survive, to be admired, to succeed, to love, to take care of his own. And this is what we're going to focus on. Now, I didn't get into the commercial world for the love of science. I'm not a scientist. But what I found by looking at the fields of what we call decision science, and by that I mean behavioral economics, neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and social psychology, is that science knows more about behaviour change and why we do what we do than the commercial world ever uses or even knows about. And when I first started in this field, I would say to the guys who are now my colleagues, "How do you know that?" And they'd look at me and say, "But Phil, how come you don't know that?" Because we're talking about a study that was done 10 years ago, or this is a paradigm that everybody knows in psychology. And the penny dropped. And the work we did together, based around decision science and changing behaviour, was really quite successful. We really launched the T-Mobile brand, and you may remember this ad in the UK about 4 years ago, the Liverpool Street Station flash mob dance ad. That one ad is the single most successful ad in the history of UK telecoms market. It grew sales by 49%. It halved acquisition cost. And it's done pretty well on social media. That's 3 times the number of views of a John Lewis Christmas ad. It's done pretty well. So this stuff, and I'd like to introduce you to some of the key principles here. Now, the first thing is what drives a decision. In this study, it was about purchasing products and services. This was a study done at Stanford University. And what they did was put people into brain scanners, show them images of different products and brands and services for 4 seconds. Then they showed them the price, then the respondents were given a task. Will I buy that brand for that price? And I've just taken one example, which is Godiva chocolates. And the scientists wanted to observe what happens in the brain at each of those points in time. And so they measured what happened. And this is interesting because when people see the brand or the product or the service, the so-called reward center in the brain is activated. Now, this is significant because the scientists already knew that this part of the brain is activated when we see something we value very highly. Even a mother seeing an image of her children will activate the reward center. They also knew that when this center is activated, there is a very high probability that action will follow. So this was interesting in and of itself. Now, when people were shown the price, something very different happened. The pain center in the brain was triggered. Seriously, the same part of the brain that's triggered if you cut yourself or fall over. So metaphorically, the brain is saying, that's pleasurable, that's rewarding, I value it highly, I want it, but ouch, it hurts me, it pains me to give away money to acquire the reward. And then what happened was a trade-off, and if the reward was sufficient to overcome the pain of the price, the person pressed yes. And if it wasn't, they pressed no. And the scientists could predict, just by observing the brain activity, which button they were going to press before they pressed it. And so the simple neurologic of a decision is based on this thing called net value. If the result of the reward minus the pain is positive, we will buy, we will act. And if it's not, we won't. So in terms of the commercial world and your sector, it gives us 2 very powerful levers to pull. A reward lever, and we'll talk more about what rewards are, and a pain lever. We can increase the reward, and/or we can reduce the pain of the price. And that includes behavioural costs, by the way. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, this is just like economic value and cost, really. There's cost on one side and value on the other. So let's try a little experiment. Here you can see two price reductions, which objectively are identical, £8 down to £5.99. And I'm going to ask you, if you had to take the decision, which of these you think would sell more, which one you would choose. Now, they're objectively identical, so the economic value and cost is the same. But I'm going to tell you that one sold more. So please put up your hands if you think the one on the right would sell more. And the one on the left? Okay, slight preference for the one on the left. That's pretty normal. Whenever I showed this to a retail marketing conference, and the room was split 50-50, and you've all got cogent reasons to support your choice. Now, science tells us there are three principles that support the one on the right. Size congruence, the way the brain processes numbers, a principle known as anchoring, and also what we've just seen with Godiva chocolates, the triggering of pain. And those three factors accounted for a significant difference in purchase consideration. 25% difference. Now, there's no difference in economic value and cost. And even if I take the paradigm that I grew up with, emotional and rational, how on earth do you explain this effect? You can't. There's nothing emotional or rational about it, yet it's real. And science knows why. And that's the point, that we can leverage learnings from science to help us understand. Here's another example. Now, again, I'm going to ask you to vote. This is not a trick question. There's no right or wrong answer in this. I would just like you to look at these two faces, and please put up your hands if you prefer the face on the left and the face on the right. Okay, now there is a majority voting for the face on the left, and you have demonstrated exactly what happened in the study. You've replicated the results perfectly. Now I am going to creep you out. It is official. I am going to explain the reason why you prefer the one on the left, and you will not accept it because it's a bit weird. But again, science has a perfect explanation. These faces are morphed. They are composites. 2/3 of each face is the same stock model, and 1/3 of the face is morphed of somebody else. And the reason why you picked the one on the left is because 1/3 of the face is that of Tiger Woods, and 1/3 of the face in the one on the right is someone you've never seen before. And simply the fact that you unconsciously are familiar with Tiger Woods' features led your brain to prefer it, because we like what we know. Now, that is not a conscious process. You may even have negative attitudes towards Tiger Woods, but it doesn't matter. The point is familiarity. And this doesn't just hold true with Tiger Woods, by the way. This has been tried with many other different celebrities, and the effect holds true. We like what we know. So there's some really weird stuff going on in the brain. So how can we explain this? Well, the best knowledge we have to date of human decision-making is courtesy of Professor Daniel Kahneman, who 4 years ago stood exactly here and talked about his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And that's the culmination of his life's work. He won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in 2002 for his work on decision-making. And what Kahneman says is there are two systems of mental processes going on in our brain simultaneously, what he calls System 1 and System 2. They have very different characteristics. System 1 works like an autopilot. It's on 24/7, it gets on and does its job effortlessly, automatically, spontaneously, very, very quickly. So if I said to you now, what's 2 times 2? You don't have to think of the answer. It just appears as if by magic in your heads. But if I said, what's 24.7 times 17.39? Unless you had a very misspent youth, the answer probably wouldn't appear in your head because you didn't learn it. It's not implicit. You then have to resort to the other system, System 2, which acts like a pilot. It intervenes and overrides when necessary. It's slow in contrast, it's effortful, and it has very limited bandwidth compared to the autopilot. The autopilot's processing data at about 11 million bits per second, whereas the pilot, System 2, is working at 40 bits per second. And 40 bits per second, ladies and gentlemen, is not enough to get you out of the house in the morning. And that's exactly why the autopilot is so powerful. Now, I don't expect you just to take this at face value, I want you to experience this. I'm going to show you a series of words on the screen in different colours, and I'd like you to call out loud. This is going to liven us up on a Thursday morning. Call out loud as quickly and spontaneously as you can the colour of the word that you see on the screen. Just the colour. Okay, are you ready? Let's go.
Red, black, red, green, blue, yellow, red.
Roger, where are you? Where did you get this bunch from? Oh, you're disappointing. You've proven to me you're normal human beings. So what you just experienced was the autopilot and the pilot in conflict. We coped very well with that task up to a certain point in time, and then a word appeared, a shape that your autopilot knew because we learned it implicitly. It's our mother tongue, and bang, we say blue. And then the pilot overrides, no, it's a colour. And then we're on to the next one. And we can't process that at 40 bits per second, which is why we all start laughing. And if I carried on, believe me, everyone would just end up as a mess. So we resort to the autopilot so much in our everyday lives. That comes in terms of the things that we learn about this sector or the commercial sector. We become experts. These patterns become part of our neural network of associations, and we become experts. Now, this has profound implications because, let me show you, this was an experiment where people were put in brain scanners, before they were put in brain scanners, they were asked to name their favourite brands in a number of different sectors, and also those other brands in the same sectors that they would consider buying. So the researchers knew the individual's stated favourite brand and their consideration set. Then they were put in the brain scanners and shown images of the brands that they'd nominated, and the task was choose a brand to buy. And these are the images of the same person faced with two different images of brands. So the brain scan on the right shows a little bit of activity. The brain scan on the left lit up like a Christmas tree, so-called hotspots, indicative of blood oxidation, which is in turn indicative of neurons firing. So when Decode first showed me this and said, Phil, you're a marketing VP, which is the brain's response to the person's favourite brand? I said, guys, I've got this. This is a no-brainer. It's the one on the left, because it's a person's favourite. Of course it's going to light up in response. And guess what? It's not. Why not? Because the brain on the left is thinking. The brain on the right has seen its favourite and has decided, like that, on autopilot, back into idle mode. Far more important things to do than buy a brand, by the way, like survival. And the brain on the left is burning up to 40% of the body's energy, which is why when you've had a really tough day at the office, thinking through complex issues, looking at data, analysing things, you feel physically drained. And this is exactly why the autopilot has developed, because the brain needs to conserve energy for things like survival. So in the mode on the right, the brain's using less than 5% of the body's available energy. So guess which mode the brain prefers each and every time. So this is really important. It's important to learn how to work with this autopilot because it's dominant and it absolutely drives our behaviour. And I'm going to introduce you to some principles that the autopilot responds to. Now, thinking back to the Godiva net value equation, the first thing we're looking for is what's in it for me? A reward. Again, an unconscious process. And the autopilot responds to rewards that firstly are tangible. How can I make what I do more tangible? Now, here's a couple of examples of behaviour change. If you've ever been caught speeding in a car, about a month later, a photograph arrives on your doormat with a fine. Well, that's not going to change your behaviour when it's needed, which is when you're speeding. So this experiment you can see on the left was very, very successful. Flashing up a smiley or a frowny face affects decision in that moment because the autopilot decodes that very quickly. We don't even need to see a number to see how fast we're going, just whether we're speeding or not. And that changes the behaviour. And it's tangible. It's there in the moment. The Lego example, you've got a box of bricks. What the kid wants to know is, what am I going to build? So Lego introduced a virtual reality system where you could scan the barcode and see a 3D image made tangible of what was in the box. Highly rewarding for the autopilot. The next principle is immediacy. I want it now. Now, thinking about your donors setting up regular donations It's a bit like what the example here that a bank did. They wanted to encourage saving. The behavioural costs involved, so the pain involved in this process is I've got to do it. I've got to phone the bank or visit the branch or go online, and then I've got to decide how much. And if it's not regular and I only want to save on an ad hoc basis, how much and when and what's the trigger to do it? So what they did very simply was create an app that was always there, a big red button on your phone. It's tangible, it's immediate. I can do it now, and I could donate, or in this case, I can click to save whatever amount I prescribed, $2, $5. They got people saving hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of this. So it's tangible and it's immediate. And the third principle is certainty. How certain is the reward? In this case, this was O-Power, getting people to change their behaviour in energy consumption, and they made the value certain by comparing you to your neighbours, with a smiley face and also graphically. I don't know what a kilowatt hour is, but if I can see how well I'm doing versus my neighbourhood and the people who are energy efficient, it helps to change my behaviour. And they estimate the effects in energy consumption was equivalent to hiking the price by 20%. Another example of certainty like that is building in commitment. So, you know, whether it's Weight Watchers or working with a client who's looking at a dietary behaviour change, and they're using this type of app where when you group together a like-minded community, so a group of local fundraisers or local donors or whatever, you get commitment just because of the group effect. You know, this is how much we have to run this week or walk this week or save this week. How well is the group doing? And that spurs on the individual because there's a commitment effect in there. Now, contrast these principles with a plea which might be, we're building we're building schools in Africa, please donate. Well, that's kind of tangible because I know what a school looks like, but how big's a school going to be? Is it sort of small or big? It's not very tangible. It's not immediate because I don't know when you're building the school, when it's going to be delivered. And certainty, well, I don't know if it's really going to be done. And anyway, it's hundreds of thousands of miles away and I can't relate to it. Contrast that with, we're building schools in Africa, your donation buys a brick now. You know, I know what a brick looks like. It makes it tangible, it makes it immediate, and it makes it certain because I know that my donation is going to buy that brick and not be absorbed by some amorphous mass. So there are techniques that you can employ here. Another example of certainty is the power of default. Now, you may have seen this before. This is a famous case of organ donation. Whether you opt into a scheme or the default is you are opted in and you then need to opt out. There is a huge difference in organ donation, not driven by morality or religion between these two sets of countries, but simply whether, in terms of organ donation, people opt in or opt out to the scheme. Another example from science that was fascinating, you may care to think about if you've got regular donations. This was a lovely experiment where people were buying car washes. So every time I go to the car wash, I get a stamp. When I bought 8 car washes, I get a free car wash. And what they tried was 2 different collector cards. The one on the right, you can see, had 10 places, but they pre-stamped 2. So you still had to buy 8. So economic value and cost, identical. Emotional, rational, doesn't help us here. Was there an effect on sales? There was a massive effect on sales. And again, science gives us the answer. And the answer is this, that when I have those 2 stamps, the goal, the reward, is activated. I'm on my way. I've already started. I'm not starting from scratch. I already have something. And something called the endowment effect, which is that we value what we have more than things that we don't have, makes me somehow value those 2 stamps just because I've got them. It might sound trivial, and it might sound ridiculous when we look at it like this, but look at the sales effect. It absolutely works. This autopilot is dominant. Now, I'm going to introduce you to a framework that we use to work with the autopilot, and we're going to look at a couple of principles that we can use to employ. So the framework is this: what goes on in the autopilot? So everything you do in terms of communicating to your communities is on the left-hand side. It's like data, all these signals coming into the brain, advertising, direct mail, sponsorship, celebrities, whatever it might be, they're all data coming into the brain. And the autopilot deals with them broadly in 3 chunks. The first thing is attention and perception, the gateway into the brain. We have to get in through the 5 senses. The second block is cognition, where the brain turns those data into meaning. What is it? What does it represent? And we use associative memory to do that, to make sense of the incoming data. And then we get motivation. What's in it for me? Is it rewarding? Now, all of this happens in milliseconds, and it happens largely unconsciously. It's underpinned by associative memory and overarched by context, which can also change our behavior. And then finally, if all the stars are in alignment, we get the target behavior we want on the right-hand side. Now, what we can do is see how we can work with this framework in a couple of areas. The first is effectiveness, and the second is building brand equity. And these are just a couple of examples. There's something like 120 principles of science that sit behind all of this, and I just want to show you a couple of examples right now. The first is attention and perception. So we can get people to look where we want them to look. And as soon as I put that image up, I know exactly where all of you looked. Whether you're men or women, it doesn't matter. Everyone looks at Brad Pitt. Now, conventional wisdom in advertising says when you lay out a print ad, you start at the top left with the headline, and then you have the offer or the brand or the payoff or whatever, bottom right. And yet you all looked at Brad Pitt first. Why? Because it's hardwired in us to attend to other human beings. There's nothing more rewarding for the brain than another human being. It's part of our survival instinct. Is that person going to kill me, or could I mate with that person? I mean, it's quite primitive, this stuff, but there are parts of the brain that are devoted and have developed over millions of years. Hey, look, we are victims of our own evolution, okay? Millions of years. There's an area called the fusiform gyrus that is devoted to facial recognition and decoding facial expression. It's very important to us to ascertain whether that person approaching us is friend or foe. So we look at the face. Now, that's hardwired. So we can work with this. We can get people to look where we want them to look. And if I showed you this image now and said, what jumps out? The cue. Thank you. The cue jumps out for the reasons of another principle of what's called stopping power. Our attention is drawn automatically to things that contrast in colour, shape and size. And the cue contrasts against its surroundings. Now, this is so well known in visual neuroscience that it's possible to actually write an algorithm to replicate this process, to deconstruct an image, and then based on the saliency of points, colour, luminance, contrast, etc., we can get a piece of software to predict where you look. And this is exactly it. This is a tool that we use with a lot of clients to help design and optimize print layouts in particular, to say, where do I want people to look, and what's the stopping power? What are the hot spots of attention? We used this with one of our clients, BT. Now, they had this piece of direct mail that was not working for them. It wasn't getting the response rates they wanted. And when we used the tool, we were able to ascertain why. And the key reason was that face. Bottom right, attention is drawn to the face. The problem was it sucks the attention away from the call to action, which is on the right-hand side of the page where the offer is. So our advice to BT was very simple. In the short term, take the face off. And this is what the tool predicts will happen. Now the face is gone, those contrasting elements are the stopping power. They're the hotspots. That's where the offer is. Did it work? They tried this in A/B testing. Their response rates went up nearly 32%. Now, hands up if you'd like a response rate increase of 32%. Okay, rhetorical question. You know, when, like BT, you're sending out millions of mailings, that is not a trivial increase in response rate. So we can take the principles of science and leverage them to our advantage to get people to look where we want them to look. Now, I'm going to talk about goals, which is the other end of the framework. And I'm going to start with another quotation here. This is from the social anthropologist, Roy Dondrad. And what Roy said is the following. To understand people, one needs to understand what leads them to act as they do. And to understand what leads them to act as they do, one needs to know their goals. Now, we're going to look at goals because this is absolutely fundamental to behaviour change. Goals lie behind a lot of the constructs and paradigms in the commercial sector. When I was a brand manager, I used to measure attitudes. I used to measure things like brand love or meaningful brand or whatever. But what I've come to realize is that those are all outcomes of getting goal achievement. Let me illustrate that. We had a client who said, our key metric is brand I love. And we looked at their metrics and we looked at their competitors, and guess what? All the users of all of those brands said strongly, I love that brand. The key point was, why do they love the brand? Not whether they feel warm about it. Why do they feel warm about it? Why do they feel attachment? Why do they choose that brand? And goals lie behind this. So, let's look at the goals that people might have. So here again, we turn to science. We look at evolutionary and social psychology overlaid with neuroscience, because all this is regulated by hormones and neurotransmitters. And science has determined a set and defined a set of goals that drive human beings. And this is universal. This is the joy of it. It works across demographies, across cultures, and across categories as well. There are three primary drivers of the human race: security, autonomy, and excitement. Now, autonomy is about who's the leader of the pack. This is about superiority, success, recognition, status, esteem, and power. Security, on the other hand, is about warmth, tradition, closeness, care for self, care for others, sociability. And excitement is the novelty-seeking system in the brain. This is about going hunting and seeking out new sensations and experiences. It's about zest for life and experimentation. Those are the three primary drivers. Now, we have developed a model that replicates that, but also adds in hybrids between the two, because behaviour is obviously a continuum. So if I'm climbing a mountain, for example, I meet goals that are in a field we call adventure, which is about courage and risk-taking. And they're a blend of autonomy, success and recognition. I've done it, and excitement, of course, because it's exciting to climb a mountain. Now, the interesting and very elegant and simple transition from all of this science into the commercial world is that we have come to learn that certain brands are associated with goal achievement. So whilst millions of years ago guys would have fought with clubs and hit each other to determine who was the leader of the pack, nowadays we do exactly the same, but we do it symbolically. We do it through the clothes we wear and the cars we drive and the watches we wear. So we have come to learn through many years of communications and experience that brands help us to achieve these goals. Now, if we think about this sector, of course we can apply the same model to it. And I just did this off the top of my head. Now, it's easy to look at this intuitively, but I'll also show you how you can do it objectively. So if we looked at the rewards of charitable giving, there will be some within the autonomy sector. Certainly, for some people, it is about recognition. It is about peer group status. It is about the foundation stone and recognition, for services to charity. So there will be goals for some people in that area. There will be goals for other people in the security area, which is about caring for other people. It's about belonging to a community. And there'll also be goals in the enjoyment sector, which will be about the psychological relief that I feel, the dissonance that might be created through seeing perhaps a disturbing image or learning about something that's going on that makes me feel psychologically ill at ease, and I can assuage that feeling by acting, by donating money or by donating my time. So there's a comfort and a relief involved. So just intuitively, you can work with this model, but perhaps more importantly, you can measure this. There are techniques now that we use that access and measure the autopilot system, because as we've seen with all of these examples, the vast majority of this stuff is non-conscious. Therefore, we can't ask people direct, explicit questions, because we just, as human beings, we simply lack the introspective access to it. And even if we do access it, sometimes we're unwilling to report it, because we won't talk about things, because it might not be politically correct or whatever. So we can access a system that bypasses all of that and taps straight into the autopilot. And what the benefit that gives you is it's now data-based. It's now objective. So I'm sure, like I did in the commercial sector, you have quite lengthy debates in your organisations about, well, I think this, well, I think that. And I like this, well, I don't, I quite like that. And in the end, how's the decision taken? Probably by the most senior person. But you've spent hours and hours in this debate, and here's a way to cut through that, because now you've got data, and it's come straight out of the brain. This is a really powerful way to understand your brand in comparison to the sector, your competitors, if appropriate. You can also use exactly this technique to measure the impact of your activities. So communications, sponsorship, for example. You can see what is that triggering within the autopilot. So it's a powerful way to leverage the science. Now, if I've whet your appetite for this whole area, and it has just been a whistle-stop tour, a couple of things I would point you towards. The first is a shameless plug for my own book, Decoded, The Science Behind Why We Buy. The second, I'll invite you to sign up on our website, decodedmarketing.co.uk, for a regular science update. So every quarter, we take a topic of interest to the commercial world, we look at it through the lens of science and then report it back in layman's terms. And believe me, although my colleagues are PhDs and professors, if I can understand this stuff, then anybody can. So it's in layman's terms. The one we're about to publish is about the difference between liking and wanting, a very key distinction in everything that we're doing. So I'd invite you to sign up for that. We don't spam you, we only use it for that purpose. So it's been a pleasure addressing you this morning. I hope that's been of interest to you and that you've enjoyed a little foray into decision science. Thank you.